We just went north of 400 people. Now we're almost up to 410. People are still joining, but it's a couple minutes after the hour. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the morning session as much as I did. And I hope you also had a nice lunch break. And we are down to the last half day of the 2020 NHGRI Symposium. But we are about to have a special treat, and that special treat is a keynote speaker. And I'm really delighted to introduce the keynote speaker for this year's NHGRI Symposium, Dr. Rod Pettigrew. I will actually keep my introduction fairly short since there's a really nice bio that was written about Rod on page 9 of the symposium program. So if you want to see more details, go to page 9. In terms of what Rod's currently doing, Rod is currently the Robert A. Welch Professor of Medicine and serves as the CEO of something called Engineering Health, or EnHealth. He's also Executive Dean for Engineering Medicine at Texas A&M and Houston Methodist Hospital, where he's also Adjunct Professor of Nanomedicine. But I think as many of you realize, this is actually a quasi-homecoming for Rod, as he is a former NIH Institute Director. In fact, he's an internationally recognized leader in biomedical engineering and biomedical imaging. And he actually came to NIH in 2002 to be the first director of NIH's National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, sometimes referred to as NIDIB. Rod served in that capacity until 2017, at which time he left to go assume the positions I just told you about earlier down in Texas. In terms of his earlier training, Rod had extensive training, remarkable. He received his BS degree in physics from Morehouse College as a Merrill Scholar. He then attended Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where he earned a Master's of Science degree in Nuclear Science and Engineering. He proceeded to then get a Ph.D. in radiation physics at none other than MIT. And then finally, he went off and got an MD degree at the University of Miami. Now, when I was thinking about who to invite to be this year's keynote speaker, I certainly was very interested in and actually have spoken to Rod several times since he departed NIH in 2017 in the very cool pursuits that he is involved in leading down in Texas. This newest undertaking that he's going to tell us about, EnHealth, is really the world's first initiative to holistically integrate engineering into all the colleges of a university that are part of a healthcare enterprise. And then EnMed is really creating a whole new school that integrates engineering into medical training to develop a new kind of innovation-minded physician. Sometimes I think he refers to a physicianeer who invents solutions to healthcare problems. So Rod's going to spend some of his time telling us about these really interesting and innovative new approaches in training and the interface between engineering and medicine and medical sciences and healthcare. But what really caught my attention in a very timely way was an essay that Rod wrote that was initially put up on by AAMC, the American Academy of Medical Colleges, or American Association of Medical Colleges, back in July. And if you remember, back in July, was really one of the very harshest moments, if you will, or the most dramatic moments with respect to the racial unrest and the attention to racial injustices and inequities that this country was facing, all in the middle of a pandemic. And Rod felt compelled to write about this because of his own personal journey, some of which he's going to be sharing with you. And it was this incredibly eloquent essay that was entitled "Humanity Binds Us," which actually, as you can see, is the title of his talk today. And so I just thought that what an opportune time to have Rod come and tell us about his journey, what he has faced as an underrepresented minority going through a system and eventually becoming a leader in a system that has really presented many obstacles to him along the way, all of which he's sort of knocked down. But at the same time, has the opportunity to tell us a little bit about some of the cool things he's pursuing as one of the real world leaders at integrating engineering and medicine and healthcare. So I just thought that was great to have him, and we're delighted that he's here. I'll just end my introduction on a very personal note. As you do the math, you could see that Rod and I overlapped as institute directors for about 6 or 7 years, and we really enjoyed each other's friendship and collegiality. Rod was often a person I would sit next to at institute directors meeting, or Rod and I think we're on a couple of committees, actually several committees. I can immediately think of in search committees and working groups. And, you know, he and I always chatted and always joked around. He's got an incredibly jovial and uplifting personality. He was also a great mentor, being more senior in the role as an institute director. And many times Rod gave me good advice, shared stories, and was really helpful in a number of initiatives that we did together. So just at a personal level, I owe a big debt of gratitude for Rod for just being a great friend and colleague and mentor as an institute director. So with that as a backdrop, we're in for a treat. I'm going to turn this over to Rod, who's going to talk to us about how humanity binds us. Rod.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. And I'm doing a sound check. If you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me.
You sound great.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm so delighted that Eric reached out to me, invited me to virtually return to the NIH. I did expect to return at some point. I thought I might be on a committee or two, but I never expected that I would be a keynote speaker at the NHGRI's annual meeting. And I certainly didn't anticipate this topic that Eric has introduced, which is centered around social justice, equity, and racism. So this is a bit of a surprise, but I'm delighted that Eric reached out to me, invited me to do this. I'm delighted that he read my essay, my op-ed, as I would call it, and that he found it informative and insightful and useful. And in fact, I wrote it for the purpose of really trying to educate my colleagues here in Texas. When I showed it to the director of communications at Texas A&M, she thought it deserved a wider audience than Texas A&M only, and I was gratified to hear that, and found its way at AAMC, and here we are now. So this began with a note from Eric, and I'm actually going to read it to you because it sets the stage for this presentation and discussion. So Eric said, the essay that you wrote for AAMC last month caught the attention of many of us at NIH in general and NHGRI specifically. It was a terrific piece and very relevant to ongoing local conversations about the challenging issues that we face in this country related to racism, including the biomedical community. With that in mind, I was wondering if you would be willing to be the keynote speaker at NHGRI's annual symposium, and so you guys can guess what my answer was. So with that, I have adopted as the title for this presentation, Humanity Binds Us, which actually, as Eric mentioned, was the title of this opinion piece. And I'm now trying to get my slides to advance. At last. So sometimes it takes a little bit of a lag in Zoom universe, I have noticed. So, Eric, again, I want to do a check and make sure that you see my slides and my slides only.
Do. They look great, Rod.
Okay. But almost every professional society, every organization that I belong to, and many universities, if not all of them, have now over the course of the summer issued statements about racism, their opposition to racism, and what each society or university is going to do to combat racism. I particularly like the title here from the GSA, Genetic Society of America. Racism is everyone's problem. You can see just beneath that, there are 3 heart-directed organizations that combine to issue a joint statement: the American Heart Association, the Association of Black Cardiologists, and the American College of Cardiology. also issuing a joint statement. National Academy of Medicine, a statement on racial equity and the adverse effects of racism. This is by the president of the NAM, Victor Zhao. The meeting concluded yesterday, and in that meeting, in his address, he cited several challenges. COVID, obviously, one of them. The issue of social justice and racial equity being a second, and the third one being the climate change and global warming. But he has set this as a target for the National Academy of Medicine. He's been joined by the National Academy of Science and also the National Academy of Engineering. Those three academies also issued similar statements. And you can see the other societies here, as well as the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which has issued a rather eloquent statement on anti-racism, which I recommend to you. I think it was particularly well done. So talking about racism, social justice, and equity, then brings me to this slide. The op-ed that was published by the AAMC, Humanity Binds Us, was during the summer. And subsequent to that, the National Academy of Engineering also posted the very same opinion piece shown here as a member reflection under the same title in its flagship quarterly, The Bridge, and this is now appears in the current issue, the fall quarterly of The Bridge. But it's the same, and I'm showing it here. When this was initially published by the AAMC, I sent it to somebody that all of you will remember and recognize, a name you'll remember, Harold Varmus. And I sent it to Harold because he had asked me to join a discussion group called Rescuing the Biomedical Research Enterprise that he and a number of senior educators around the country formed. And one of the topics that was coming up was just this topic. So I sent him this op-ed piece. When he read it, he wrote me back and said, this is great. It's a lot like the commentary in Cell that's written by Koff. Well, Koff, I know, but Koff and I, and this is Koff here, had not corresponded at all. We had written very similar opinion pieces, both citing very similar sorts of experience that speak to the systemic nature of racism in our society. But neither of us had communicated with the other about our respective pieces before they appeared. And when Harold told me that, and I read Koff's piece, I wrote him back and said, well, the truth is that probably just about every minority that you know could write a similar editorial, a similar piece. And the fact that two individuals from two different generations, as you can see. Koff is a UMBC graduate. He's a part of the Meyerhoff program. He's now at Duke and is a assistant professor, very bright and on the rise, and no doubt well known to the NIH. But we are from two very well separated generations. And the fact that two generations from two individuals growing up in two different parts of the country. He grew up in Silver Springs, Maryland. I grew up in Albany, Georgia, would write and say almost the same thing. I think speaks to the systemic nature of the problem that we were addressing, which is racism. And of course, the concern for racism is that it impedes society. It's anti-humane, it's inhumane. It opposes health, and it stymies diversity, which is critical for success. We know that diversity drives innovation. So racism, as the GSA said, is everyone's problem because it does all of these things, it opposes all of these things that are so important for progress in our society as a whole. So let me delve a little bit into the opinion piece that I wrote that Eric read and contacted me about. There are two elements here. There are two sentences that were pulled out by the AAMC as sort of a abstract of this op-ed, which is only 750 words, but so you got this sort of mini abstract here. So the first one is that subtleties of racism don't kill you in minutes, but they are deadly. So the point here is that racism exists, it's pervasive, it goes through our society, both in overt ways and also in subtle ways, in insidious ways. The macroaggressions and microaggressions are there all of the time. It is real, it exists. And though many of us who are people of color have just sort of pushed it aside and plowed forward, it is there, it's always been there. I have never to this day escaped racism. And then the second statement is that what is needed is a communal experience that teaches us that all of us comprise one beautiful human mosaic. It is our common humanity that binds us, that brings us together in this beautiful human mosaic. And in this piece, these two statements are made and to varying degrees illustrated. So just a few comments about that and sort of delve into this to underscore the points that I'm trying to make. The first one being that racism is a reality. It does exist. Now, I probably don't have to really convince you of this, but I thought that underscoring the extent to which this exists, how pervasive it is, would be insightful. And in fact, since I've written this, a couple of colleagues have written me and said, and these are close colleagues, some people that you would know, who said, before I read this, I really didn't understand what was meant by systemic racism. But now I'm starting to sort of get it, because I don't, and both of these are non-minority persons, say, I haven't had that sort of exposure. I don't experience that. So I was gratified that in some way this was communicative and provided a better understanding of what is meant by systemic racism. Victor Zal yesterday actually called it structured racism. So the first thing I cited was the Central Park incident. You remember happened back in May. It was May 25th. And incidentally, this was the same day that George Floyd was killed. Was this incident in Central Park where a woman in the park with a dog, not observing the leash law, having a dog running around in a bird watching sanctuary, and this peaceful bird watcher asked her to leash her dog, and she responded in a way that sought to subjugate him based on his color. And the fact that she said, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna call the police and I'm gonna tell them that an African-American male is threatening my life. That's what I'm gonna tell them. And then she repeated, I'm gonna tell them an African-American male. So we know this story. So that really pulled back, in my view, the shroud over racism that had existed. It really said to everybody who watched that video that racism is there, it's systemic, and it's a part of the fabric. How so? Because she knew that all she had to do was say these code words, African-American male, attacking me, and that the police and law enforcement system would understand that, they would be energized in a negative way by it, and basically what she was doing was weaponizing this common understanding that she and the police had. And she didn't have to say anything beyond that. She knew that would unleash the fury of the police force against him. And that's what she was hoping for. And that incident, to me, spoke to this. And I was thinking, actually, be honest, I was sort of thinking, I thought we had gotten beyond this, but it shows to me that we haven't. And that the police understood, and she understood the same thing, and they were speaking in code, and they knew what it meant. So ironically, and actually tragically, the same day that happened, which is May the 25th, was the day that George Floyd was tortured to death at the knee of a police officer. This didn't come to light until a day or two later, but when everybody watched that episode unfold, it was just too much to bear. And I think we all became outraged by it. So the next point I'm making in this opinion piece is that both of these episodes, and particularly the one with George Floyd, showed a basic disregard for the humanity of minorities, even the basic humanity of minorities. How else could a person sit there with his knee on another human being's neck with his hands in the pocket and rock back and forth and do that for almost 9 minutes while he's crying for his mother and not be moved by that? So this kind of disregard for basic humanity, that he doesn't see that person as human. He doesn't regard him in the same way that he regards himself, other people in his family. Surely no person would treat himself that way or a member of his family. And what I was trying to end with this is to get everybody to see that we are of the same humanity, that it is our humanity that is common to all of us. I go on to say that this kind of disregard for minorities, it happens to people simply born with darker skin tones, and it affects us all of the time, and that the frequency and the range of small and big injustices that I have encountered for as far back as I can remember up until the current time might actually surprise many people. And I go on to sort of recite a number of these, and I won't go into all of them because I'm going to show you in my next few slides that several other people are saying the same thing. But I will make note that one of them that I cited was a physician that I experienced over the phone describing his patient that he'd sent to me to do an MRI study when I was a professor in Atlanta at Emory University. He was in the rural part of Georgia, sent me this patient. The patient was Black. I called him to tell him what I had found. And in that conversation, he started to make these disparaging remarks about the patient based on his race. Again, just kind of shocking to me. And a number of times that I've been in airports, even just before COVID, where a policeman would walk up to me and just based on nothing more than my skin color, began to interrogate me and ask me demoralizing questions like, what do you have on you? What are you carrying? How much money you have? Where did you get it? Where did you get the money? Did anybody give, things like that, things you would never imagine would happen. So the comment here is that these kinds of episodes, they don't kill you in 8 minutes and 44 seconds, but they are deadly. They kill the spirit, they kill the sense of humanity, they kill a sense of belonging, a sense of equity. In young people, they stifle creativity, the realization of potential, and any chance that people have from diverse backgrounds of contributing to solving problems. And it is the diversity that we seek that enables us to be optimally creative. So here is Kof. And Kof, as I told you, recounted very similar kinds of incidents. Kof is quite accomplished, as you can see, even at his young age. He's a PCAST award winner. And here he is with President Obama in a session about frontiers in medicine. And he writes in his piece that once he was, as a medical student in Duke, he left the library, was walking home, going across campus, and he had all of his sort of medical paraphernalia on, his white coat, his ID badge, et cetera, and his scrubs. But that didn't prevent him from being stopped by the police and questioned for 20 minutes, trying to establish whether or not he was who he said he was and should be there. Just amazing that something would happen like that in the 21st century. And the time that he was invited to give a keynote lecture at a major international conference, and he was in the lobby of the hotel, and somebody walks up and hands him their suitcase, their bag. And it's very much like the experiences of the other people I'll show you. Here's a commanding general of the US Army Corps of Engineers, West Point graduate, a Stanford graduate, a GW graduate, has a PhD. Recites an episode when he goes to buy the paraphernalia that identifies him as a general for his uniform, and the receptionist refuses to sell it to him, thinking, surely you're not a general. Or that he's parked in a space that has a marking on it that says reserved for colonels and above. The woman next to him, who is white, tells him he's illegally parked. He tries to ignore her. She calls the police. They come, they arrive. They think that she's telling the truth. After they see his ID, they apologize, but they never say why she was believed and why they came. Similar episode with Eldrin Lewis. He's chief of cardiology at Stanford. He writes about being mistaken as a patient transporter, even though he had on his white coat and carrying a stethoscope, and how frustrating it is after all of this training, all the 8 years of college, everything he's going through, ascends to his highest levels. He's there at Stanford, and he gets confused for someone else. Surely he can't be a doctor, they think. Or the urologist who is now finishing his training at the University of Michigan, who talks about racial injustice and asks the question, isn't it time to eradicate? If not now, then when? And cites his experience with a urologist professor, where they were looking at the huge disparities between the death rates in blacks versus white due to prostate cancer. And he's asking the question, surely there must be some systemic reason that contributes to this. And the professor saying, no, it's simply biology. And he's going, no, it's not just biology. There are other things too. Or the episode here from the first Black military service chief, Charles Brown, who was confirmed this summer as U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff. And in this video that someone went viral, where he goes through this litany of episodes that he's thinking about that highlight his encounters with the systemic or structured racism. One of them, I'm thinking about the time when I was wearing the same flight suit with the same wings on my chest as his peers, and then being questioned by another military member as to whether or not he really was a pilot. Or LaTonya Harris, who is a scientific director at Janssen Pharmaceutical. She's seated here, this is her team, and she has recounted this episode when she was in graduate school, walking out of the classroom with a classmate who's a white male. They're talking about the grades. He says that semester he finished with 1A and 1B, and the rest A's. And that he got a B in thermodynamics, and that's as well known to be a hard course. And then she shares that she too had gotten A's and 1B, and he goes, oh, then you gotta be in thermodynamics, really a hard course. And she says, no, actually, I got an A in thermodynamics. And he stops and turns and looks at her and says, you got an A? and in such a way that he just couldn't believe that she got an A. They were friends then, they remain friends, they're still friends now, but she says he admitted to his having succumbed to the stereotype and later apologized. But these kinds of microaggressions exist all the time. And I was struck recently when Alice Johnson was pardoned by President Trump during the RNC this summer after being sentenced to life imprisonment for conspiracy to possess cocaine. It was her first offense, life imprisonment. And it brought to mind the repeated episodes of Robert Downey Jr. That he had with the law enforcement agency for multiple possessions of cocaine. She was sent life imprisonment for conspiracy to possess. He had multiple arrests for possession of cocaine, and his last arrest resulted in 3 years probation. That comparison is so stark. She spent 20 years in prison, and we know him now as a celebrated and beloved Marvel movie star as Iron Man. So what I'd like to try and finish with, Eric mentioned a couple of things I want to talk about, not only racism, but what we might do to address that particular challenge, particularly as it is convolved with the public health crises that we're facing now, the medical crisis, that is COVID, and the derivative crisis from COVID is the economic crisis. And then the social crisis, a significant part of which is health and health inequities, which have been laid bare by the medical crisis. The extent to which health equities exist has been dramatically exposed by COVID and the pandemic with which we're all dealing with now. And you guys are more expert on this than am I. So I would posit and strongly believe that there is a great opportunity for us to address this through a deeper integration of the physical sciences, the life sciences, and engineering. And that is what I am working to achieve now in this new undertaking that Eric described in Texas called EnMed and EnHealth. And in fact, the concept is summarized in this slide, is to integrate physicians and engineers to create a new kind of healthcare profession, integrating across science, medicine, and engineering to create this new kind of person who has a blended understanding of all of these disciplines as they in fact exist in nature. So this blending and the understanding of this blending is something we're working to pursue so as to be better equipped to understand the fundamental basis and mechanisms of disease, and from that better understanding, to have better ideas about how to improve our diagnostics, our therapeutics, and our preventative measures. So a physicianeer I sort of describe as the scientific multilingualist, one who understands life in all of these scientific ways and disciplines as they are coexist and are blended in nature. In fact, if you think about life, it is impossible to have life without all of the sciences interwoven in a seamless nature and participating and giving rise to this thing that we call life. This is illustrated here with this symbolic icon of sort of engineering and something that you guys all appreciate. The fundamentals of life and biology, the double helix here. So what we're doing in EnMed, which is a contraction of engineering and medicine, is to focus on engineering the future of health through a rigorous and deep convergence of the sciences, biology, and engineering in order to purposefully train invention and problem-solving minded physicians, who we do call physicianeers. Here is how it's done in broad strokes over the course of the 4 years. And the output is to train individuals who are able to innovate across all biological scales, from molecules and cells to whole organ systems, creating something like this, which is this sort of a beautiful prosthetic hand controlled by the mind, as this hand is. Innovations at this level, but all being brought into the healthcare arena in an effort to deliver health and to improve health, including data science and informatics, which happens to be one of the areas that Eric and I overlapped on when I was at the NIH that he referenced. So I would offer that the silver lining in the COVID cloud has in fact been the emergence of convergence. We have seen this convergence as it has begun to give rise to a better understanding of the fundamentals of disease, and from this, improved treatments of disease, the accelerated integration of engineering and biology. I think the advent of RADx is an example, an exemplar of that. But what a beautiful example here of the subject matter for which the chemistry prize and the Nobel Chemistry Prize was awarded this year. A topic that you guys could educate me on. Charpentier and Doudna, with their discovery and development of this marvelous technology and tool for gene editing. The CRISPR-Cas9 system with the nucleic acid component CRISPR, carrying along these genetic scissors and providing this tool that allows us a practical way to now begin to engineer corrections in the genetics of disease, of individuals who have diseases for which we know those misspellings. The beautiful and inspirational story that has emerged over the last year around the treatment of sickle cell disease at the NIH is a case in point. And the first time I saw that story, I was so elated to see that. It was just marvelous. But I also wrote Francis and told him, there should be a better way that you don't have to poison the patient to suppress the immune response. We ought to be able to work together to engineer tolerance so that you don't have to almost kill the patient before you cure the patient. And he responded, as you might imagine, he said, yeah, we're going to get a group of smart people around together and we'll do that. But a modification of this approach is already leading to an innovation in the diagnostic arena. So here's Jim Collins at the Wyss Institute at Harvard and MIT in Boston. And they have a modification of the CRISPR-Cas9. It's actually CRISPR and a different set of enzymes as scissors. The Cas13 is what they use to construct this smart mask. And the smart mask here is a mask that not only shields the neighbor of the person who's wearing the mask, as we all try to do when we wear a mask, but also detects whether or not the wearer has COVID. And it does so with this lateral flow analysis in which within the layers of the mask, there's lysis of the nucleic acid, the RNA, amplification in the second stage, so this three-stage process. And in the third stage, using Sherlock, which is their modification of the CRISPR system using Cas13, along with a reporter molecule, which is cleaved when CRISPR detects the RNA from COVID, and the Cas9 cleaves it and cleaves this reporter molecule, liberating this colorized reporter, which is captured in by the antibody on this specific site on the surface of the mask. And you can see the color change then indicating a positive test, and that in fact the person wearing it does have COVID. Rather clever, rather clever. This is being pursued for commercialization by Jim Collins and his colleague, and while I don't have data, it tells me that it works quite well. So I think that as an exemplar of what happens when you integrate these disciplines. Now, moving to the health inequities that have been highlighted by COVID. So here's the CDC data on the disparate hospitalizations as a function of ethnicity and race, 45 times higher for people of color, as you can see here. Quite striking. It's just actually mind-blowing. You can say those words, but just think about that. 400 to 500% higher hospitalization rates for African Americans and Native Americans and Alaskan natives. Also, a somewhat higher death rate when you look at all comers. But if you look at the data adjusted for age, as was done by this group, then this too shows an unacceptably several-fold higher death rate for people of color, and that this is distributed across the nation. But if you look even more closely within geographic locales, one finds that the death rate even tracks the zip code, leading to many discussions now about the zip code being more determinative than one's genetic code as to the lifespan. Here in the metropolitan DC area, right where you are now, you can see that there's a 6 to 7 year difference in life expectancy for individuals born and living in the district in comparison to areas just adjacent to it in Montgomery County, right in Bethesda, or across the river in Fairfax. If you are born and live there, your life expectancy is substantially longer. Unacceptable. Even higher comparing the Back Bay area in Boston, which many of you might be familiar with, versus West Roxbury, which is where minorities live. 30-year lower life expectancy and higher death rates and lower life expectancy in Roxbury versus Back Bay, which is a more affluent neighborhood. So quite dramatic. And this comes at substantial cost as shown here. Here's the economic burden from health disparities, which is substantial, 126 billion in 2020. And if it goes unchanged, this will triple, is projected to triple over the next 30 years. Chris Murray, who you no doubt also know, who's the director of the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, producing the statistics and the projections about COVID, has cited racism as a public health issue. So my question here, and I'm sort of closing on this, is given this, are there things that we can do? Given that racism is systemic, often implicit, not overt, and this happens in both conscious and subconscious ways, can we engineer functional guardrails around the system to combat this? Can we have technologies and approaches that inject checkpoints into the routine system, that give us feedback, that make use of the data and information that we have? The more that we learn about genetic and the genetics overlays, and the overlay between that and the interplay between that and the environment. You know, I'm struck by Francis's old statement: genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. We already have a lot of data about environment. We have satellites that monitor the atmosphere, and from that determine the level of particulate matter in the atmosphere. can we use that data and help it to guide how we manage people going forward? We've seen already that when we focus on needs like this and train our intellect and our resources and our technology and innovators on these challenges, we can come up with new approaches that can make a huge difference. An example here is just what we're doing now, the way that we're meeting now. Who thought that 10 months ago that we would be able to hold a whole symposium with 400 people at one time, with each of those individuals being in her or his own house and home? I think this is an example, even though the fundamental technology had been demonstrated a decade and a half ago by Skype. Under the pandemic, we've really have accelerated this technology that's developed, and now we have this ability to bridge somewhat of a social divide through this technological innovation. Perhaps we can do the same. Perhaps we can have more decision support systems in the clinic, more checks and reminders for physicians who are seeing minority of persons, better development, more accelerated development of telehealth. And I've mentioned already environmental feedback. We have wearables all over the place now. I'm wearing this Oura ring that tells me when I go to sleep even. Not only when I go to sleep, but what time I go to bed, when I go to sleep, when I wake up, and what quality of sleep I had. It's pretty amazing. So taking great advantage of that. Eric, I was going to end on this slide that talks about a non-invasive and passive way, an unobtrusive way to measure hypertension. It is this video. I won't belabor it, but just to show, this is a concept that I had quite some years ago while I was at the NIH about being able to monitor blood pressure in the background, because it's such a determinative factor in how long we live across the globe. Having that data collected, shown to you in the mirror. When you get up in the morning, you look in the mirror, you get this feedback, and it tells you what your blood pressure was. And the composite data then being sent to the healthcare professional. Imagine we also included in that the genomic data, particularly for people who are at risk, people who are more likely to have hypertension, being focused on and having this kind of intensive monitoring going on. It is a concept. A lot that we can do if we can converge these disciplines. So I think I'll stop with this observation and quote from Arthur Clarke, who made the statement that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I use that because I think it can inspire us by looking at things that you think or perhaps a bit beyond our reach, but realizing that years from now, they could very well be reality. The Western Union memo that says a telephone is not to be taken seriously, they were wrong. On the opposite end of the spectrum, almost 100 years ago, somebody at Radio News conceived of telehealth, even before the TV was invented. This was years before the TV was invented. And you see this person here with his tongue sticking out so the doctor can see it, says, stethoscope on his chest. He's watching the doctor is watching him, they're watching each other, and you got this camera on the top, like we do on the top of our computers now, providing this telehealth concept over 100 years ago. That says to me that we can envision a brighter future, a greater future, and we can achieve that through our collective work and our synergies and the symbioses that exist in all of the sciences and technology, reflective of that natural symbiosis that exists in nature. Thank you, Eric. I went on a bit long, but I did have a lot there to cover.
Well, Rod, that was fantastic. I can tell you that by the time you're about 5 minutes into your talk, we got up to nearly 500 people, and there's still nearly 500 people listening. And so they all received a treat. We also have questions coming in. Susan Vasquez is going to join us in a minute. And was going to be looking at those questions and asking a few of them. And we do have time for some discussion. I'll start with a couple questions while Susan's reviewing the ones that are coming in from other NHGRI staff. You know, and Rod, I'd love to talk to you both about the first half of your talk and the second half. So maybe I'll ask a question about each, because they're both incredibly compelling topics. You know, one of the things in learning a little bit more about your background, you didn't mention, but that you were raised in rural Georgia. You actually attended a segregated public school before you ended up going to Morehouse. Can you maybe just reflect a bit on your early upbringing and how that influenced both sort of your approaches to decisions that you made professionally, and also how you think it influences you as you gain leadership positions. You know, I always think that early experiences can sometimes shape your approaches to decision making and to leadership.
Well, Eric, I tell you, we only got 7 minutes left, and I could probably spend the whole 7 minutes talking about that. But it is true that I grew up in the segregated South, that I attended segregated schools. And in fact, the first time I ever sat in a classroom with a white person was when I went to school in Vienna, Austria, my 3rd year in college. I am a Morehouse graduate, and we won't have time to go through everything, but you have one of my Morehouse brothers at NHGRI now working with Vince, Jameson Floyd. So if you talk to Jameson Floyd, you probably have similar experiences to share. But going to Morehouse, actually, oddly as it may seem to people who have not are not familiar with HBCUs, was a very, very not only positive experience, but inspiring experience, and one that really equipped me to be able to withstand the kinds of challenges that I have talked about, to deal with the racism that I have experienced both in big ways and small ways, both in overt ways and subtle ways. When you're in an institution where everybody looks like you, then how you look is not an issue. The focus really was on learning, but there was also a focus on service and making contributions to the world. And that was the mantra at Morehouse. It was not only you have an opportunity to do well and make a contribution, it was you're expected to do well and to make a contribution. And you would have these sorts of experiences throughout the training with people who had already graduated and gone into the real world and made a way. And the issue of racism was there. It was something that you dealt with, but despite that, people strove for this bigger thing, which was advancing the human condition. And that was really what I focused on. It was advancing the human condition. So I guess, long story short is, indeed, I had a challenging time along the way. I had all of these sorts of episodes and indignities, and still have them. It might surprise you that even right now, to this day, if I go into a restaurant and I'm not known in that restaurant, there is a much better than even chance that I'm going to be shown to the worst table in the room. Now, I'm not going to sit there. because I won't accept it, and I don't accept it. And quite frequently, when that happens, I'll say, first of all, this is a pretty noisy table. It's right by the door. It's right by the bus boy. Don't you have a better table than that? What about that table over there? And then sometimes when the maitre d' would sort of resist a little bit, I'd say, well, would you want to sit here? And he'd go, no. Well, why do you think I want to sit here? Would you put your father there? No. Well, why are you putting me there? But those sorts of things continue to happen. I think for those of us who are minorities, despite that, I think our real focus is on trying to make contributions and do big things. Eric, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. So I actually have more questions, but I see questions piling up. Susan, why don't you ask one of the questions coming in from our colleagues?
Okay, thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Pettigrew. I have a large number of questions that have come in, and I know we won't get to all of them. So I will let you know that for those questions we don't get to, I might compile a list to share with you so you can kind of see what some people were thinking. The first question I'd like to ask is, thinking on your experience at NIH, what do you think are the most impactful things we can do as NIH employees at the IC level to address systemic racism?
Well, one of the first things you can do is what is happening here, to have an honest conversation about racism and the fact that it's a real thing. It's not imagined. It exists. There's just no two ways about it. The fact that other people write and describe the same sorts of experiences that I've had was not surprising to me. But the one thing that I did learn from two friends, both of whom were Jewish, one is the past editor of a scientific journal, and the other one is an MD, Ph.D., and distinguished and quite accomplished and international scientist. And we're good, and I'm great friends with both of them. But they wrote me after they read this piece and said, I really just, excuse me, didn't understand racism before, but now when you sort of break it down to a personal level, I began to see it. These kinds of episodes that happen in everyday life, I'm starting to understand it and see it. Now, I talked about this one episode where early in my professional career, I was one of the developers of the cardiac imaging software for the first manufacturer of MR equipment. And we had installed an MR machine at a well-known hospital. I had developed, after it had been installed, the software that would allow you to actually image the heart, because the heart is dynamic and moves, and MR is sensitive to motion. If you don't account for motion, you get a blurred image just like you do with the camera and somebody moves in front of it. And when I installed, so I arrived at this hospital after I developed this software to install it, and had arranged to meet with this famous cardiologist who was an echocardiographer to show him how to use it and teach him how to use it. My arrival was after hours. So as I'm walking through the hospital and trying to find my way to the MRI system, I happened to encounter this person in a white coat. I didn't know that was the cardiologist. And I just asked him, sir, can you direct me to the MRI suite? And his response was, I could, but I don't, it's already been cleaned, so I don't think you need to go there now. you don't need to go there now because it's already been cleaned. And I said, well, it might surprise you, but that's not why I'm going there. And he said, well, it's, you know, kind of down there somewhere. But, you know, really didn't give me much of directions. But anyway, I found my way there. I installed the software. I calibrated the software. I was there with the technologist. I saw him pop in and out. And then after a moment or two, he just finally asked the technologists, two of them, Dr. Pettigrew is supposed to come here and install some heart software. Let me know when he arrives. Have you seen him? And he goes, well, he's here. He said, where is he? He said, well, he's over there. He goes, where over there? They were pointing to me. And he said, there at the console. And boy, could you see his mouth hit the floor. And I was, at that point, I had sort of surmised that he was that individual. Well, I was a professional. He was a professional. We started talking about imaging the heart. I showed him how to use it. I taught him how to use it. He didn't have the foggiest idea of how to do imaging of the heart using MR. So the tables had really turned. But so those kinds of experiences are real. What you can do at the NIH is to really have an understanding, a conversation that gets everyone to the point of really understanding that this thing is a real thing, that it really exists. And it's there all the time in subtle ways and in big ways. And work to counter that. I think that is what one of the first things you can do on a subconscious and level is difficult without consciously attacking it. There are other concrete things that could be done that the NIH has already begun to do by making sure that you have representation of minorities, that you have minorities at the table. So minorities need to be in the room where it happens. They need to be around the table in the room where it happens. That's where the decisions are made. Otherwise, you just never get that perspective in those views being brought to bear on the problem. So I think those are a couple of things that can be concretely done. And then the third thing is sort of related to the first, and that is to consciously sort of try and discontinue practices that are based on legacy in the routine way and the way it was done in the past. And that's sort of the way it was done. And to continue to perpetuate things that are insensitive to people of color and that are insulting to them. To understand what those are, you have to have a conversation with those individuals. But I think that happens with a variety of cultures.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a command decision, just like Dan Castor did this morning. This conversation's too good. We're in a half-hour break now in principle. What I will tell people, we're going to be resuming at 2:30. But if you want to stick around for hear a few more questions asked of Rod, we'll go for maybe about another 5 minutes, and then you'll still have a little bit of a break before our next session starts. But rather than stopping right now, Susan, if there's another good question, why don't we ask Rod that question? We'll just go for about another 5 minutes.
Okay, we have so many great questions.
Right, I know it's tough.
But the next one I'm going to ask is, how can institutions like NHGRI do more to increase diversity and to shift more funding to address health disparities, especially since now so many are spotlighted due to COVID?
Well, you have to make a commitment to do that. I think the commitment is there, but at the end of the day, you do it within the guidelines, operative guidelines that exist now, and those guidelines do exist. So no one would expect you to operate outside of rules and regulations. But to the extent that those rules and regulations allow you to do it, you make it a priority item, and then it happens. One thing I want to say, Susan, that I intended to say that ties in with the last question that you asked me, is there has been, over the last decade or two, the tendency to address the diversity issue by having representation, but having that representation being a one-off. You have one person on this committee, one person on this group, one person admitted into this program, one person who is a new scientist amongst 50 scientists. You know, that is, in fact, tokenism. And you just can't check the box that we've done our part when you have one. You got to have sufficient numbers so that people actually feel as though they belong, so that people are belonging, so that they can contribute, and so that what ideas they bring are really valued and not treated as an idea of just that person. We really need to have this sort of environment where minorities become interwoven into the fabric of the whole operation, to the point that you really don't see them as minorities. You just see them as part of the fabric of the whole. So right now, you're seen as underrepresented minorities, and we have representation from underrepresented minorities. What we really want to get to is we got this beautiful fabric. It's a mosaic, and the fabric has these different kind of people in it.
Hey, Rod, let me ask you, you know, the exact things you're talking about, I consistently find my children who are in their 20s expressing, and I wonder, and I hear when I talk to colleagues around here, and as we see younger and younger people coming to the Institute, do you think some of this will naturally get better as the next generation pushes my generation aside? Because they see the world more like you just described than I think my generation sees it.
Eric, that was how I ended my essay and my opinion piece. That was really sort of the theme and comment that I ended on. And it's interesting that you would reference that, because when I was writing it, I too was thinking about my own child, who's very multicultural in his mindset, and his friends, and they interact and they enjoy each other, and they like that. You know, it brings spice to their existence. So when I made the statement that when people learn that it's humanity that really binds us one to the other, the differences which do not involve character. So we don't want people to have deficits in character. But if you have differences that don't involve character, those differences actually bring character to the whole milieu. It makes it much more interesting. That's what I mean. It brings, you know, character in the sense of features that make it not monotone and uniform, but bring excitement and variation and flavor to it. And once we sort of realize that, I think that is when our society really will live up to its creed of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. So Eric, I agree.
I think the younger generation is going to really help on this.
I think because, you know, actually all of us, everybody who's still listening now, each one of us has no doubt had an experience where you thought you had a preconceived notion about something. It doesn't have to be about race, but about something or somebody or something you're going to do, some experience you're going to have. And then once you actually experienced it, you change. Your notion changed. And that's, I think, what will happen once we actually begin to have these experiences with each other, in which we begin to just learn each other and appreciate each other. And in fact, actually do become part of the whole fabric of society and not be seen as differences, as fundamental differences. We are not fundamentally different. Eric, you can tell me what the difference is in our DNA and our whole genome. It's just minuscule. Minuscule. So it's it's our humanity that is the commonality, and that's where we have to get to. I do think that the upcoming generations are closer to that than is our current generation. And I do think that the more that there are integrated schooling experiences, more integrated play experiences, and experiences at work, the more that these differences, these trivial differences, fade away.
Well, I'm going to have a stop on that optimistic note because I think that I really believe in that optimism. And so, Rod, let me just say, just profound thanks. This was fantastic. I feel badly that not everybody was able to get their questions. As Susan said, we will bundle these together and send them to you just so you can sort of see the things that other people are interested in. But this is all part, I will tell you, this is all part of a growing dialogue that I've not seen in my 26 years at NIH that has a lot of momentum behind it. So I think what you talked about and these kind of discussion points we're having are really feeding into a larger energy swell here at NIH that really I think is very, very important and very timely. And I think your talk really helped contribute to our enlightenment, our understanding of these circumstances. I think are very important. So thank you very much. Let me just tell everybody else, I just want to remind you, thanks again for joining this session. We're now going to have, I guess it's down to about a 17-minute break or so. We're going to resume at 2:30. Remember, 2:30 today is just like yesterday. You have the opportunity either to go to the poster sessions for the next set of posters, but you have 2 hours to do that. If you want, from 2:30 to 3:30, you could go and pick up and join some of the discussion sessions that are going on. I don't know which one you went to yesterday, but you could pick a second one and go to that from 2:30 to 3:30. So that's what you could do. Whatever you're doing from 2:30 to 3:30, at 3:30 you should go see some posters. All links for all these sessions can be easily found in the symposium program or on the Teams site for the event. If you have any questions, you can email Penina Larrick or you can ping her in Teams and she can assist you. As I think you realize, the symposium will wrap up at 4:30 today with the close of the poster session. And finally, we will send out our survey at the end of the symposium. We think it'll take you 5 minutes or less to give us feedback by filling out that survey, and that'll really help us guiding our efforts to plan subsequent symposia. So with that, again, Rod, thank you so much. It's great seeing you. It's been fun talking to you. And for all the NHGRIers, go enjoy the last little bit of this year's symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, Rod.
And thanks so much to the Zoom universe for dialing in. Please do send me those questions.
We will. We absolutely will. All right. Take care, Rod.